So let's talk about React. I'm going to be doing two things today. I'm going to be building a React app from scratch. So I'm not going to use the built-in React create React app command. I'm just going to build it straight from scratch. And then I will build it using the built-in the built-in create React app. So React is a library. It's actually so the difference between like a framework and a library is that a framework is like an ethos of how things should be done, and they need to be done in a specific way. And they also consist of many libraries. So a framework can consist of many libraries. React is really only one library, but 90% of the time, in order to successfully, or 90% of the time, you're going to be using multiple libraries. And just how React works and how the data flow is, it almost acts like a framework. So again, React is a front-end framework or front-end library. Does anybody know who created React?
Facebook.
Yep. So Facebook created React. It is the most popular front-end framework, primarily because it's supported by such a large tech company. But there are a plethora of front-end frameworks out there. It seems like every 3 months, a new front-end framework comes out. And they're like, oh, here's the new hot framework. But in reality, React's been the biggest player this past half a decade or so. But there is React, which we're going to be learning. It's the most popular, most in-demand framework. There's React Native, which is specific to writing phone apps. It's kind of like phone apps using React. There's minute differences on it. So if you know React, learning React Native isn't that much more of a stretch. So you can actually start building web applications. Just getting that up and running could be kind of cumbersome. There's Vue.js, but so Vue.js is open source. It's actually what I'm learning now at my current role, and we're converting everything from essentially what would be considered Django templates to Vue.js, but it's all in Rails and React, or Rails and Vue. So Vue.js is very similar to React. There's just some minute differences. It's almost like React Lite, but it kind of handles a lot of like annoyances that React has. Vue kind of solves that. There's Angular. Angular was an older front-end framework that was more popularized in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, or the 2000 teens, I guess. I think they're on Angular 3 now. There was a big jump from Angular 2 to Angular 3, and there was a massive drop off of users because of essentially you had to relearn everything. There's also Svelte. So there's all kinds of front end frameworks that you can plug in or utilize for your front end. But we're going to be learning React. Questions on React or front end frameworks or libraries? Right. So quick review of the model view controller, the MVC architecture, or in Python, the MTV or MVT. So in Django, when we're building full stack Django apps, we'd have our models, we'd have our views. So we define our database models, and then our views would handle all the business logic, and then they would pass that to our Django templates, which would then render to the client. What we're doing now is we're completely disregarding our Django templates, and we're going to be plugging React in, or React is going to take place of our Django templates. And you're going to see how that works towards the end of this module. Questions? All right. So there's a few libraries that you'll need in order to get a React. At the bare minimum, there's like 3 libraries that you'll need. You'll need React, which is the main React library. React DOM, which is a library that gives specific methods so you can interact with the document object model or what is being displayed on your screen. So most of your components should not need this, but there is like this render method that you'll see. And then there's this relatively newer library called React Scripts that does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. It's optional, but again, it does a lot of heavy lifting for us. So we use it a lot. So this package provides default scripts for React. It also includes Webpack and Babel. If you don't know what that means, what those are, don't worry about it. Just know that there are these two files called Webpack and Babel, and which we'll cover next. So, and this is just so whenever you hear these, you won't be totally like, have never heard this in your life. So Babel is a JavaScript compiler that converts ECMAScript because you might be using a newer version of JavaScript. It makes everything backwards compatible. So everything will work in different browsers. So it compiles everything into like kind of older JavaScript code. Webpack essentially just bundles all of your assets, your JavaScript, your CSS, all your images, everything into an actual executable code that can be executed in the browser. And you don't really have to know how to do any of this. Just know that React Scripts is going to handle all this stuff for us. But this is like an example of what a Babel RC file looks like and what a Webpack file looks like. Webpack is kind of a pain in the ass to work with if you've never dealt with it, even if you have experience doing with it, it's kind of a pain in the ass to work with. So that's pretty much all you need. So what I'm going to do is create a React app from scratch. So what I'm going to do is open up a new terminal, go to chart. Oh, shoot, no, that's not what I want. I'm going to open up new VS Code. All right. And I'm going to create a React app from scratch. And then after I do that, I'm going to create a React app using the command line. So I'm just going to create a directory called React from scratch, cd into React. All right. So if I wanted to initialize a new package.json file, how would I go about doing that? Anybody remember?
Is that npm and node?
So yeah, so I'm gonna need node. So I've got node on there. So I'm gonna do npm init to initialize a new npm package or a new npm module. It says this utility will walk you through creating a new package.json file. And the package.json file, it's very similar to that of the requirements.txt file in Django. It's going to hold all our packages, all our libraries that we have in our application. So, and with React, we don't have to create a virtual environment or anything like that because everything is installed using this package.json file. So I can just run through this command utility. So I'm just going to call it package name, version, description, entry point, index.js, test command. I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to. All right. So this is what it's going to look like. Great. And then yes. Okay. I'm going to open this up into a new VS Code window. So here is my package.json file. All right. So does anybody remember the 3 libraries, npm libraries that I need to get a React app up and running? Can anybody name one?
React.
All right.
React,
All right.
React DOM and React scripts.
All right. Yep. React, React DOM, and React scripts. So I'm installing 3 packages: React, React DOM, and React scripts. So I'm going to click enter and let's see what happens. It might take a while because React is a really big library. So just keep that in mind. I've had it take several minutes before. But does anybody have any questions as this stuff is installing?
So React is used for enterprise applications. Like, what would you not want to use it for?
There's really no like what you wouldn't want to use it for. I mean, I think a lot of developers and engineers, especially new ones, they over architect things. So like for me, like when I first started coding, I was like, I learned React. I'm like, I want to make a personal website using React. But in reality, you don't have to use React if you're just making a static web page. You can just use, HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript. But again, if you're new, you want to kind of showcase your skills, to build it in React is one of those skills that you can show off. But yeah, there's really not, I can't think of a reason. Again, it's just to display stuff to the browser. So you're going to have to use some mechanism to display something to the browser, whether it's the built-in Django templates or React or Angular or Svelte or Vue. So I can't really give you a specific what shouldn't you use React for, because it can be
something simple like a one-page website. Probably not just plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So if it's a static website, I wouldn't recommend using React, unless you would just want to get practice using React. But if you're like, just building a static web page, I wouldn't use React. Again, React is for applications, so things that will interact, data is being passed in and out, things are dynamically updating on the page. That's what React and the other libraries are good for. All right. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? All right. So let's take a look at, let's see if I can get this up and running. So notice how when I installed the React, React DOM, React script, it also added this node modules directory. And this directory consists of all the libraries that React, React DOM, React scripts consist of, as well as all their dependencies. So React might have some dependencies, some dependency libraries that rely on, that React relies on. Those are also in these node modules. So when you are pushing up your applications, your React applications to GitHub, similarly to like how you wouldn't include your virtual environment in Django in when you push up to GitHub, don't include your node modules. The only thing you'll have to include is the package.json file. The package.json file is very similar to that of the react.txt file in Django. All right. So, looks like we're on React 18. That might be interesting. So, I installed these 3 libraries. So now let's go ahead and I'm just going to look at this React scripts library because it's supposed to provide me with some scripts. React scripts, I'm just going to go there. And getting started. All right, so that might be something we might, let's see. So we have a example of the script. npm start. Folder structure. Anyway, so the React script library provides us with a script. When we run npm start, it's going to run the React scripts start command. So we'll have to add that if I want to create it from scratch. So the next thing I'm going to create two directories. I'm going to create a public directory and a source directory. Oh, man. So those aren't directories. Delete. So I'm going to go make directory public and src for source. And I spelled public wrong. All right. So inside my public directory, I'm going to create my index.html file, index.html. And in here, I'm just going to create some boilerplate. All right. And then the only thing I'm going to add in here is a one div, an empty div with an ID of, let's just say, let's call it app for right now. You can really call this whatever you want, but right now I'm creating just a single empty div with an ID of app because I'm going to have to target this. So what I just did was I initialized a new package.json file. I installed the React DOM, and React scripts. I added the React script start, or I added a start script, which when I run npm start, it's going to execute React scripts start. And when I do that, it should start my React application. Then I created two directories, a public directory and a source directory. I haven't done anything in the source directory yet, but in my public directory, I created an index.html file with a single empty div with an ID of app. And what my eventual goal is when I display this index.html and I run React, React is going to target this specific div. So it's going to render it, or it's going to target this specific div by its ID of app. Does anybody remember how you target a HTML element by its ID?
The element by ID.
Yep. So there's going to be, in our React app, there's going to be a document.getElement by ID app, and it's going to tell us to inject components in this location, some React components in our HTML. So it's going to inject some React components. And all that's going to happen inside of our source directory. So I'm going to, inside of our source directory, I'm going to create an index.js like so. And notice in our package.json, we have this main.index.js, and it's going to be targeting this index.js file. So in order to create a React app, I'm going to import. Do I even need React right here? I don't think I need to import React specifically yet, but I'm going to import React DOM. Whoop. So React DOM from React DOM. So if I open up React DOM, so React.js, so I can import everything as React DOM. So I'm just looking through here. So React DOM exports these methods, create portal, flush sync. I don't know what that is. Never used those before, but React DOM methods are also exported, but are also considered legacy. Ooh, so maybe React 18 has some different stuff, but I'm going to use this render method. So what I'm going to do is do React DOM dot render, and the render method, if I click on it, it takes in an element and what else? And the container of what I'm going to be injecting, or where I'm going to be injecting this in the HTML. So I'm going to create an HTML element called hello world. And I'm going to be injecting this into document.getElementById app. So I'm going to try to render this hello world in this part of our app right here. So if I run npm start, it's going to come into here, start. React scripts does a lot of heavy lifting for us. Let's see if I can get this up and running. We're unable to target browsers. Would you like to add the default browsers to your package.json file? Sure. All right, it's starting a development server. So that's already automatically opened up. So you can look in the terminal, it compiled successfully. You can now view your React from scratch project or app in the browser at localhost 3000 or this network. Webpack compiled successfully. And now if I come over here, you can see it says hello world. So just a quick recap. Inside my index, so inside my public directory, which I really don't like, once you actually start a React app, you really don't add a whole lot to your public directory. You pretty much don't touch it most of the time. But inside your index.html file, you have a single div. I can even get rid of the script if I wanted to. I have a single empty div with an ID of app. I can call this whatever I want. I can call it, I don't know, root. That could be single empty div. And then inside of my source directory, I have an index.js file. Split the screen. So, and I'm importing React DOM, and React DOM has this render method attached to it, which renders a specific element. And I'm doing h1 hello world, and I'm grabbing document.getElementById root. So it's whatever this empty element is. And you'll always only have one empty element here. You will never pretty much touch this file again. All right. If I come over here, you can still see hello world. So anytime you usually make changes and save it, React will recompile and dynamically update. So if I say hello world or hello Charlie and save it, it already came over here, compiled successfully, and now it automatically updated the DOM. What questions do you have about?
Is that considered JSX, that H1 element inside of render?
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll be talking about JSX later. All right.
In the render, is it better to directly pass the element that you're wanting to create, or to use a another variable in React.createElement?
Are you talking about where here?
Yes.
Or, so is it better to pass?
Directly pass the element that you are creating, or to create another variable and use React.createElement and then the element that you want to create, and then pass the variable into render?
Yeah, good question. You'll actually won't be doing that, or what I'm showing you now. You'll actually be passing in components. So you're not going to be creating an element like you would typically. We'll be creating components. And speaking of a component, let's talk about components. Let's go back here. So we'll talk about create React app. So what makes React so powerful is its reusability. Again, remember, keep your programming dry, don't repeat yourself. But if I were to go to like, let's see if HipCamp is a React. So yeah, so HipCamp utilizes React. So if I can look through here, what are some elements on the page that looks similar, or that's it. Well, actually, let's search for something. Where are people? Does anybody want to go somewhere? Like, let's look at outdoor space to like go camping or whatever. Does somebody have a cool location they like?
Yellowstone.
Hello. I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm gonna have to use this site.
right. Yeah,
It
it's
says
all,
glamping. I'm good.
Yep. All right. So are there any like elements on the page that look similar but just that are different?
I think
Or-
those are cards. So the card components are used over and over again.
So yeah, like right here, all like the list of results. So all these look very similar. The only differences are maybe the images, but they all have images. Some of them have this instant book or some attribute up here in the top left corner. They all have like a rating followed by like number of reviews, I guess. They also have the title, the number of sites, the type of camping, whether it's RV, the location. I don't know. That might be like, I don't know, the nearest town or something. And also like the price of that per night. So all these can be a single like piece of code. It's just rendered multiple times, but different data is passed into it that determines what images are displayed, what's being said right here, number of nights, and all of that. So if we look over here, for example, this is an old Airbnb site. So when we talk about components, it lets you split the UI or whatever you see on the screen into small, independent, reusable, that's the important pieces of code or reusable pieces of UI. Components could be class-based components or functional-based components. Old React 16 and earlier, or I don't even know, it might even be like React 15, primarily used class-based components, but pretty much going forward, everything is functional-based component. They wanted to kind of get rid of the class-based components just because it adds complexity. But so everything is a function now, a function-based components. You'll hear that class-based components or functional-based components. We'll learn about both because if you ever go off and work at an organization that uses React, there'll more likely than not be legacy code that utilizes class-based components. And components can have state, just like classes in Python. They have like some state, some variables that are local to that component. And there are also a keyword called props or like properties, and that is data that is passed into the component. So state, and these are key reserved keywords. So state and props are reserved keywords. You can't use those names for anything else. So again, state is data that is generated local to that component, and props is data that is passed into that component. So if you think of functional based components, state would be variables that are initialized. If you want to think of it like this, state is variables that are initialized within the functional based component, where props are data that is passed into that function, such as like when you're actually invoke that function, you pass data, you pass in arguments. That is what props are considered. So components can access data as props, similar to passing arguments into a function. State is an object that stores data that is local to the component. similar to props, but it is only local to that specific component. And then there's also something that is called JSX. It looks very similar to HTML, but it's actually, think of it as Jinja. If you remember like Jinja 2 in Python, like the Django templates, where you can pass in variables and do inline code inside of Django templates. That's very similar to that of what JSX is. It looks like HTML, acts like HTML. There's just some small nuances, that differences when interacting with it. So that's what JSX is. And all the components return JSX. So it will always return or render some JSX at the end. So another example. So over here, we've got these little buttons or filters, whatever you want to call them. So we have date, guess, price, time of day. Here, these are the little cards, and we have these three components, or component quote 3. So component 1, where it says dates, guess, price, time of day, language offered, those are probably all the same component. The only difference is the props or data that are passed into those functions or those components. Same with like component 2. These are all the same component. The only difference is either the props that are passed into it, or yeah, it's pretty much the props that are passed into it. And same with component 3. These are all the same component. The only difference is what props are being passed into it. And then components can also render other components. So you can have a parent, like top level component, and that component can render multiple components, such as this card component probably consists of multiple components, like a favorite icon component, a card image component that literally is only responsible for displaying a card image. Like card main, star rating could be its own separate piece of, or separate component. So in reality, the star rating I can use throughout anywhere in my app just by calling the star rating component. Just like think of it as a function. I can think of this UI as a function that I can call anywhere within my React app, and it will display a star rating. So if you think component 3 is a parent component of card image and card main, and you can pass props down. So props are always passed, not always, but passed from the parent component down to the child component. And then card image component. So this card image will render this favorite icon. And so props can be passed down into the favorite icon function component. So props is passed down from parent component down to child. Think of it as data that is passed into a function that calls another function that calls another function. If you want to think of like that, and that data is passed in from the parent function, passed in as an argument to the card image function, which is data then passed into the favorite icon function. And this is kind of what it might look like, just part of it. But let's actually get to that. So when we created our React app from scratch, we're not actually dealing with components yet, but let's go ahead and create a component. So I'm going to get rid of the package JSON, and then inside my source directory, I'm going to create another file called app.js. And I'm going to create a function component. So if I wanted to, I can literally just go, I'll use, what should I do? I'll use fat arrow functions. So const app, which is a function that returns some JSX. Let's see if, yeah. So if I want to do hello world, H1 again, hello world, like so. And at the very bottom of this, I want to export this function so I can use it inside of my index.js file. So I'm going to do export default app. And now inside of my index.js file, I'm going to, it's best practice to capitalize your components. So what is it, Pascal case? But yeah, so I'm going to say from or import app from app.js or app.js. Questions on this?
Could you explain the difference between the public and the source folder?
So the public folder, think of it as just where right now is where your images are going to be stored and where your HTML file is. Just kind of where your assets are going to lie so far. Or actually, let me look, because it depends on just right now, just think of it, that's where your HTML file is going to be. And that's what's going to be displayed to the
Kind
client.
of like your static folder in a Django app.
Sure, yeah. But that's not, I don't want to like say that for sure, because you could move your assets around in React. It just kind of depends on the architecture of it. So you could also have your assets in the source directory, which you will see. But just.
So everything in public, is that what's displayed in the browser to the, ultimately that's what's displayed in the browser, and that everything else kind of goes to that?
Yeah, so your index.html is what actually gets rendered like to the DOM, or yeah, what's to the client. Everything in your source directory is what is injected into your index.html file.
Got it.
But you will never, I won't say you will never, or you will rarely touch your public directory. You'll just have it with the HTML file in there and that's it. And you won't touch it. Everything else is going to occur in the source directory. And this is where all your business logic is going to lie, is in your source directory. All right. Any other questions on this app function based component? Oh, all right. So I imported this app functional based component and I'm going to render it right here. But in order to actually invoke this function, you don't just do app like you would like a function. React, since this is a component, I'm going to render it similar to that of like a HTML element. I'm going to call app like so. So it's almost like an HTML element. So open bracket, app, closing bracket. And now if I come over here, go to localhost, you can see nothing's changed. I can say hello world. This is a functional based component. And it's going to dynamically update like so. With this app component, it can only always return a single div, a single parent div. If I wanted to add another div down here, it's yelling at me already. Here is another div. And then when I save it, it's going to throw an error. It's going to say parsing error, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So it can only have one parent element. You might also see this occasionally, like an empty element like so. That's not recommended. Oh, here we go. And what's nice about this is same thing with this render. It can only take in a single element. I can also add a div, a parent div, like so, and render this a bunch of times. There we go. We got 5 different functional based components. All right. What questions y'all have? I'm gonna